Chapter 4 The Mountain of Silence, Part 1. Into the silence, the morning mist hung low over the earth, curling around the narrow mountain path like soft breath exhaled from the forest itself. The last village was long behind him now, its fading, temple bells like echoes in a dream. Ananda walked alone. No companions, no destination. Just the soft rhythm of his feet against the stone and the sound of his breath. For days he had heard the stories, spoken quietly round fires, whispered in the voices of those who had never dared to go. The mountain of silence waits for no one. It reveals only what you cannot bear to hear. And still he walked toward it. His steps were slow but sure. With each breath, Ananda let go of some lingering attachment to a thought, a memory, a desire. It was not that he was running from the world, but rather walking gently away from its noise. As the sun rose behind him, the forest gave way to steep cliffs. Wind moved through tall pines like a flute played by an unseen hand. Ananda paused by a narrow overlook. Below, the valley stretched in silence. No voices, no motion, just space. He bowed his head, whispering, "I am ready." But the truth was, he wasn't sure. That evening, he found shelter beneath an outcropping of rock where a cold stream trickled beside him. He gathered fallen branches and lit a small fire. There was no one to talk to, no one to guide him, only his thoughts, louder than ever before. He sat in meditation, but his mind resisted. Thoughts came in waves, the image of a child from the village who had died, the sorrow of a woman who had never forgiven her father, the boy who asked, "Why do good people suffer?" And woven through it all, his own face, not as a monk, but as a boy, sitting in the corner of a quiet home, watching his parents argue through closed lips and turned backs. It had been years since. Ananda thought of that. His eyes opened. The silence around him was no longer peaceful. It was confronting. The mountain didn't speak, but it listened. And in its stillness, it reflected everything he had ever buried. That night, as stars scattered across the vast sky like grains of salt, Ananda could not sleep. He sat by the dying fire, knees tucked, beneath his robe, and listened to the forest breathe. There was a stillness so complete, it pressed into his chest, and then a whisper, not from outside, but within. "You have come to seek silence, but are you willing to hear yourself?" His breath caught. This was not the stillness of peace. This was the stillness before awakening, the space where truth begins to speak. Quietly, without apology, tears welled in his eyes, not from fear but recognition. He was not afraid of the mountain, he was afraid of what it might show him about himself. At dawn, he woke to frost on the edge of his robe. He lit no fire. He ate no food. He walked further upward, into the thinning air, into the cold, into the silence, and with every step, the world grew quieter. But within him, something was beginning to stir, a voice not heard since childhood, a stillness that wasn't emptiness but presence, full, listening, alive. The mountain was no longer outside him, it had entered him, and there, in that vast echoing quiet, Ananda took his first true breath in years. He had arrived. Part 2. The storm within the sky had darkened by the time Ananda reached the ridgeline. The trees grew sparse. Wind whipped and bent. Clouds hung heavy like drapes pulled low across the world. The mountain, once serene, now loomed, not as a teacher, but as a mirror. And the silence had changed. It no longer embraced, it challenged. Each gust of wind pushed against him like a whispered warning, turn back. But Ananda had turned inward now. There was nowhere else to go. That night, the storm came. It arrived. Not with thunder, but with a deep moan from the belly of the earth. The sky split. Rain poured down in sheets, drenching Ananda as he hurried beneath a jagged rock overhang. He crouched beside the cold stone wall, pulling his robes close, watching. The fire he had managed to light sputter and die in seconds. The silence was gone, replaced by chaos. Rain pounded like drums on the stones above him. Wind howled like 100 voices crying out at once. And inside, Ananda felt the storm mirrored exactly his thoughts spun. His heart raced. His breath, once his anchor, now lost. In panic, he had no food, no dry shelter, no path, no voice to calm him, no teacher, only the storm, both outside and within. Then, deep in the blackness, something inside him broke open. A voice, not words. A sensation. He remembered the story of a monk long ago, who had meditated through a storm so intense it tore trees from the earth. When asked how he had remained so calm, he replied simply, "I did not try to stop the wind, I let it pass through me." Ananda sat up straighter, closed his eyes. The storm screamed. So did his thoughts, but he did not resist them. He let the fear come. He let the loneliness speak. He let the memories rise. And in the middle of it all, his body trembling from cold and emotion, he whispered, "I am listening." The storm roared on, and so did his inner voices. The boy who felt unloved, the monk who questioned his worth, the teacher who feared he had failed his path. "I see you," he said aloud. Each voice, each shadow rose like ghosts in the cave of his heart. And still he did not run. He stayed. He breathed. He softened, not to collapse, but to allow hours past. The storm never paused, but something shifted. Ananda, wet and shaking, felt no urge to escape. Instead, he leaned his back against the rock, while he wrapped his arms around his knees. And for the first time in a long time, he rested, not because he was safe, but because he no longer needed to be. The storm was no longer an enemy. It was a cleansing. And when dawn arrived, pale and wet and quiet, Ananda stepped from the cave with slow reverence, as if the mountain had just baptized him. He walked out into the mud. He raised his eyes to the grey sky, and he smiled, not because he had conquered the storm, but because he had heard it, because he had felt it, because he had lived through it, and he was still here. Part 3. The meeting. The storm had passed, but the mountain was still wet with its memory. Mist clung to the trees like breath not yet released. The earth, soaked and dark, squelched under Ananda's bare feet as he moved through the pines. His body ached, but something inside him had quieted, not from exhaustion, but from surrender. He was no longer searching for signs, no longer hoping for comfort. He was just walking, and that, strangely, was enough. It was mid-morning when he saw the figure. A man, perhaps in his 70s, bent over a small garden of mountain herbs. He moved slowly, with purpose, his fingers brushing the leaves with care. He did not look up, did not speak. Ananda stopped. He bowed gently, not from politeness, but from recognition. The old man said nothing. He simply nodded, and with the same silence, gestured to a wooden stall beneath, a slanted cedar roof nearby. Ananda sat. They did not speak, not then, not even after an hour had passed. The man finished tending the garden, washed his hands in a stone basin, and returned with a wooden bowl filled with broth. warm, earthy, fragrant with wild garlic. He placed it in front of Ananda. Still no words. Ananda accepted it with a quiet smile. He bowed again and drank slowly. The warmth spread through his belly like light, and still they said nothing. Later that day, the old man showed him where to fetch water from the mountain spring. He pointed to a broken step that needed mending. He handed him a broom for the worn wooden deck. No explanations, no instructions, just gestures and presence. Ananda understood. This was not silence as absence. This was silence as language. For 3 days, they lived like this. No conversations, only actions. Each morning, a bowl of soup. Each afternoon, tending to earth, wood fire. Each evening, sitting under stars, listening to the world as it was. No past, no future just now. Ananda began to feel his thoughts slowing, his questions fading. Not from answers, but from irrelevance. The need to speak, to explain, to ask had vanished. One morning, as he swept the path clear of fallen pine needles, he realized something. For the first time in his adult life, he felt completely present, not wise, not enlightened, not close to some great truth, just here, fully, honestly, quietly. On the 4th night, as they sat beneath the stars, the old man finally spoke. Only once, you have remembered. Then, silence returned, like a blanket pulled gently over the world. Ananda did not reply. He did not need to. He had remembered. Part 4. The breaking point. The sky was clear that night. A dark, endless velvet stretched across the mountaintop, pierced by stars so sharp they seemed to hum. A cold breeze rustled through the trees, and the old man had already gone to rest. Ananda remained seated outside, his hands wrapped around a warm stone bowl of tea. Untouched, something inside him was stirring, but not gently. He had been silent for days. His body had softened, his thoughts had thinned like morning mist, and yet, somewhere deep, a heaviness remained, not loud, but dense. It came not with words, but with weight, and that night it broke open. It began as a sensation, tightness in the chest. Then a thought, sharp and uninvited. Who are you without all this? Without the robe, without the role, without the teachings, the students, the journeys, without the monk, without the seeker, without the one who carries questions. Who are you? The warmth in the bowl faded. His hands grew cold. Ananda sat still, but inside, the storm had returned, not from the mountain, but from the depths of his own being. Memories tumbled out. The child he had once been, craving love that never came. In words, the young novice, desperate to impress his teacher, to feel chosen. The wise man he had become, always needing to offer answers, yet secretly unsure if he had any left. And then, more painfully, the spaces between those roles. The moments when he didn't know who he was at all. Moments of hollowness, of pretending, of fear. Tears came slowly. Not dramatic, not loud, just there, he whispered. I don't know who I am anymore. And the mountain said nothing. But that silence spoke more truth than any scripture. He bowed low, forehead to stone, not in worship, in surrender. Every part of him that had clung to identity, to legacy, to even the idea of awakening, loosened. He sobbed for all the masks he had worn, for all the people he had tried to be, for all the quiet desperation behind his noble service. It wasn't false, but it wasn't whole. And in that collapse, that breaking, came the real silence. Not quiet stillness, the kind that does not need to explain itself, the kind that is not earned, it just is. He sat upright again, feeling emptier than he ever had before, and lighter. There was nothing to hold on to. Now no beliefs, no fears, no identity, no path, just breath, just presence, just this. And in that space, raw and quiet and wide, something opened. Not a revelation, a remembering, not a voice, a knowing that required no explanation. He sat through the night. He didn't move, not because he was strong, but because there was no need to move. Dawn came slowly, light brushing across the trees like a blessing, and for the first time in his life, Ananda did not feel like a monk. He did not feel like a man. He felt like life, simply being. Part 5. The echo of stillness. The morning sun rose without sound. It touched the edges of the cedar roof, the smooth stone steps, and the damp soil where Ananda had once walked in doubt. Now the world looked no different, and yet everything had changed, not outside, inside. Anand arose slowly. There was no urgency, no task to complete, no voice urging him forward. He simply stood, feeling the weight of his body grounded on the earth, as if he and the mountain were one. The old man greeted him with a small nod, no questions, no congratulations. He handed Ananda a bowl of warm rice. They sat beneath the morning sun, side by side, chewing slowly, breathing as one. No words, no need. The silence between them wasn't empty. It was full of everything that didn't require explanation. Peace, presence. Knowing later that morning, Ananda packed nothing. There was nothing to take. The old man placed a small stone in his palm, worn smooth, warm from the sun. No message, no meaning, only presence. They bowed to each other, like leaves folding toward earth. Then Ananda turned and walked away. Not back, not forward, just onward. The path down the mountain was the same as before, narrow, quiet, familiar, but each step felt new, not because the world had changed, because he had. He no longer sought answers. He no longer needed to be seen. He no longer wished to explain. He simply was. By midday, he came upon a stream, the same stream from days before. He knelt beside it, cupped the cold water in his hands, and drank. It tasted like sky and stone and time. Then he sat, not to meditate, not to reflect, but because it was the most natural thing to do. A bird landed nearby, soft-feathered, brown-eyed. It looked at him without fear. A breeze moved through the tall grass. Somewhere, far off, a bell rang, but it no longer meant anything. Or perhaps it meant everything. Ananda smiled, not because he understood, but because he no longer needed to. A child might have asked him, "What did you learn?" And if he were to answer, he might have said that silence is not what remains when everything else is gone. It is what was always here, waiting, gently, patiently. I only needed to stop speaking long enough to hear it. He sat beside the stream until the sun dipped low behind the hills, and as darkness approached, he stood. No destination, no name, no bowl in hand, just stillness, stillness, walking on 2 feet. And thus Ananda descended the mountain, carrying nothing, yet holding everything. Part 6. The returning path wound downward. It was the same trail Ananda had walked before, roots curled through stone, moss thick underfoot, birdsong drifting between the trees. Yet every step now felt different, not lighter, not heavier, just whole. He was not returning, he was arriving. Villages began to appear again, tucked between hills. Smoke curling from rooftops. The laughter of children faint in the wind. People saw him, but they did not recognize him. Some bowed, thinking him just another monk passing through. Some offered him fruit, rice, or quiet greetings. He accepted them all with a soft nod, not out of obligation, but from gratitude. He did not speak unless spoken to, and when he did, his voice came not from his mouth, but from stillness, from presence, from a heart no longer trying to teach, but simply to be. In one village, an old woman pressed a cup of tea into his hands and whispered, "You remind me of someone who once passed this way." He did not speak either, but I remembered him for years. Ananda smiled. She would not know it was him. He would not say it was no longer important. As he moved through towns and forests, he found that he left behind no footprints, only silence. Not the silence of loneliness, but the kind that fills a space and makes it sacred. People would pause when he passed, though they did not know why. They would breathe a little slower, speak a little softer, listen, as if something sacred had just moved through the room, because it had. He came upon a boy by the roadside one day, crying that the boy's dog had died that morning, and the villagers had told him, "It's just a dog, you'll be fine." But the boy's heart was breaking. Ananda sat beside him, saying nothing, not to fix, not to explain impermanence, not to teach, just to sit. And after a while, the boy stopped crying. He looked at Ananda, confused. "Why does it feel better?" Ananda only smiled and touched his chest with 2 fingers. The boy nodded, though he did not understand. Someday he would. Ananda reached the river where it all began, the place where the old bowl had once floated gently past him. He sat again on that same bank, the same sounds, water, birds, wind, but now they felt like family. He reached into his robe and pulled out the small stone the mountain hermit had given him. He placed it on the ground beside the stream, not as a marker, but as a reminder that what is still can move all things. And as the sun began to set, painting gold across the sky, Ananda closed his eyes, not to meditate, not to seek anything, only to listen to the mountain still echoing within him, to the silence that had become his home, to the breath always present, and to the quiet voice inside that no longer needed answers, because there were no questions. Left only this, only now, only stillness. Chapter 5. The Bridge of Return, Part 1. The gate that remained closed, the rains had ended. The paths were clear again, and Ananda walked not with urgency, but with intention. It had been many seasons since he last saw the village by the river. Bend, the place where rice fields met the forest, where laughter used to float through the bamboo huts. The place where, long ago, he had failed to say what needed to be said, and now he returned, not to speak, but to be. The gates of the village were still the same, 2 wooden beams bound with rusted rope, leaning slightly to one side, like tired shoulders. They had always remained slightly open to travelers, but when Ananda had left that day, he remembered the gate had been shut, a quiet signal, not out of anger, but of pain. There are wounds that speak through silence. He stepped through the old archway. Children were playing under the banyan tree. An old dog lifted its head and blinked at him, too tired to bark. Farmers nodded in recognition, not of him, but of his presence. But no one said his name, and that, somehow, felt right. Ananda walked to the northern edge of the village. There, by a humble clay house with blue shutters, sat a young woman, maybe 22, maybe older. Her hands were dipped in water, gently washing herbs in a wooden bowl. She looked up as he approached, and in that gaze he saw it. The little girl she used to be, the child who had clung to his robe, begging to understand why her father had died. Without saying goodbye, the child he had no answer for, only silence now. She did not run, she did not speak, she simply met his eyes, and Ananda bowed low, deep, fully, not out of guilt, but out of acknowledgement, that there had once been a gate he could not pass through, and now he asked for nothing, not even entry. She rose and placed the bowl of herbs by the door. Then, without a word, she brought out another bowl, filled it with tea, placed it before him, and sat. No questions, no forgiveness, just stillness, just presence. For a while they watched the river bend, same river where her father had bathed every morning, the same river where they had placed his ashes, the same river where Ananda had once stood, unable to look her in the eyes. Now they watched together. 2 generations, 2 hearts, one. Silence. The tea grew cold between them, but the moment did not. It remained warm, quiet, alive, and as the sky began to shift toward dusk, she finally spoke, not as a girl, but as a woman who had known grief, carried it, and now no longer needed it explained. "I used to wait for you to return," she said. "I know," he replied gently. "I thought, if you came back, you would have the answer." He looked into her eyes. "I did not bring an answer," he said, "but I came back to listen." She nodded, and for the first time in years, her shoulders softened, and the gate, the one that had remained closed in silence, slowly, quietly, opened, not to let him in, but to let the past breathe. Part 2. Echoes in the rice field. The village awoke with the sun. A rooster's call echoed over the misty paddies. The scent of wood smoke drifted between rooftops, and from somewhere deeper in the fields came the sound of sandals brushing wet grass. Ananda rose early, before anyone knocked, before anyone asked. He stepped into the cool dawn air, let the dew soak into the hem of his robe, and walked toward the rice fields, not to work, to witness. He found her there, the young woman, kneeling ankle-deep in water, planting new rice with a group of others. She looked up once, not startled, not surprised. She simply nodded, as if he had always been there. He walked along the embankment that separated the rows, careful not to disturb the young stalks. The water reflected his figure, rippling slightly, then smoothing again. He stopped, removed his sandals, stepped in. The cold took his breath. The mud welcomed him. The others smiled gently, but said nothing. He began to plant. It was a different kind of meditation, the kind that required hands, not thoughts, movement, not stillness, connection, not retreat. Each young rice shoot placed with care, each breath in rhythm with the earth. Hours passed, no one spoke, only birds did, and the wind. By midday, the sun warmed the fields, and the farmers gathered beneath a thatched shelter. Someone brought out water, someone else brought rice balls and sweet pickled mango. They offered some to Ananda. He bowed and accepted. They didn't ask who he was. They didn't ask why he had returned. They simply let him be part of the day, in the quiet of that shaded pause. An elder farmer spoke. "You were once the monk who taught by the river," he said. "The girl you sat with yesterday, she carried grief for many years. But now her eyes are different." Ananda said nothing. The elder smiled. "Sometimes healing does not come from wisdom," he continued, "but from returning." "I did not return to fix," Ananda finally replied. "I returned because the silence brought me back." The man nodded. "Then silence has done more than words ever could." They sat a while longer in stillness. Then, as if cued by the earth itself, they all stood and returned to the water. That evening, the young woman lit a small clay lamp outside her home. She did not speak to Ananda. She did not need to. But when she placed the lamp beside the river's edge, and its light shimmered across the water's surface, he understood this was not a ritual. This was remembrance. This was peace. And as the stars bloomed above the fields like silent flowers, Ananda sat outside, listening to the crickets, to the water's slow music, to the breath of a village that had once closed its gate, and now, slowly, sang again, not in words, but in rice, in wind, in flame, in presence. Part 3. A bowl returned. The river curved gently around the village. Quiet, but never still. Each morning, it carried leaves, flowers, fallen twigs, and sometimes memories. On the third morning after Ananda's return, a boy came running barefoot from the shore. He was 7, maybe 8. His shirt was torn, his hair wild from sleep and wind, and in his muddy hands he held a bowl, not new, old, worn, cracked along the lip. Smoothed from time, he burst into the space where Ananda sat sweeping dry leaves. "Look what I found," the boy cried, breathless. Ananda looked up and time folded inward because he recognized it. The bowl, the same simple clay bowl he had released into the river all those seasons ago, during the moment when his journey first began. Or perhaps it wasn't the same. Perhaps it was just a bowl. Yet in his chest, something stirred. The boy placed it into Ananda's hands with pride. It floated to the edge, just sitting there like it was waiting. Ananda turned it slowly in his palms. The crack, the shape, the balance. Yes, it was the same, and no, because the bowl, like him, had changed, worn, weathered, humbled by water and time, but intact, still whole, still able to hold. "Do you want to keep it?" the boy asked. Ananda looked at him, smiled gently. "No," he said softly. "I let it go once. It found its way back. Perhaps now it belongs to you." The boy's eyes lit up. "Really? I can keep it?" "Yes," Ananda said. "But only if you promise not to fix the crack." Why? Ananda paused. "Because that crack is where the river entered." The boy didn't understand. Not fully, but he nodded anyway, cradling the bowl as if it held treasure. Then he ran off, laughing, into the tall grass. And I watched him disappear into sunlight. Later, that evening, the young woman came to sit beside him. They watched the horizon redden. She did not mention the bowl. She didn't need to. "You didn't come back to teach, did you?" she asked. "No," Ananda answered. "I came back to witness. And what do you see now?" Ananda looked toward the river. "That nothing ever truly leaves," he said. "Only travels, until it's ready to return." The breeze shifted. The clay lamp she carried flickered, then settled. A bowl had returned. But more than that, so had a stillness. Not just within Ananda, but in this place, in this village, and perhaps in her dot. And that night, as the villagers slept under the soft hush of stars, the river kept flowing, carrying with it bowls and memory and echoes of silence. But for once, Ananda no longer needed to follow it. He had arrived. Part 4. The final teaching word had spread quietly. The old monk had returned. Not everyone knew his name, but enough remembered his presence, the way his voice once guided, the way his footsteps carried calm. By the 5th morning, a small group of villagers from across the valley appeared. They came with offerings, a basket of boiled lotus seeds, a folded cloth dyed in saffron, and questions, so many questions. They gathered near the riverbank. Just as the sun was warming the mist off the surface, Ananda was already there, squatting, near the water's edge, watching the reflection of clouds pass through the current. He did not turn when they arrived. He did not need to. He felt them like ripples. One man, tall and sharpened, stepped forward. "Master," he began, bowing deeply, "we heard you had returned. We wish to learn." Ananda nodded. Another spoke. "Please teach us. Share what you found in the mountain, in the silence." The others murmured in agreement. Ananda slowly turned to face them. He smiled gently, without pride, without resistance. Then he sat and said nothing. At first, they waited politely. Surely he was preparing his words. But the moments stretched long. The wind stirred. A bird landed nearby, still. He said nothing. Minutes passed. Some grew restless. The tall man finally spoke again. "Do you not wish to teach us?" Ananda raised his gaze and looked into the man's eyes. "I am teaching," he said softly. The group stilled, confused, intrigued, humbled. He gestured to the river. "Do you hear it?" he asked. They listened. The river flowed, as always. "That is the sound of truth," Ananda said. "It does not ask to be heard. But if you become still, it speaks." A young woman knelt beside him. "But what about the Dharma, the Eightfold Path, the Four Noble Truths?" Ananda nodded. "Yes, all true, but also only fingers pointing to the moon." "And the moon," she asked, "is already within." "You," he replied. They sat together, not as teacher and students, but as humans, breathing, listening, being. The air shifted. No one left. No one spoke. Time passed unnoticed. One of them began to weep quietly. Another closed his eyes and smiled. Ananda did nothing, yet everything was being taught. Not by him, but through him. The villagers rose only when the sun touched the highest leaves. They bowed deeply, not out of reverence for a monk, but for the silence now living inside them. They walked away lighter, and Ananda remained by the river, his own bowl still empty, but his heart full. That evening, as the sky turned the color of quiet fire, the young woman from the village returned to his side. She held no offering, only a small folded paper. "They asked me to give you this," she said. He opened it. Inside were no words, only a single pressed leaf, and beneath it a line. "Thank you for showing us how to listen." Ananda folded the note. He placed it gently into his robe, then turned back to the river and listened as he always had, without needing to speak. Part 5. Where the road ends there. Was no announcement, no farewell, no ceremony. Just the morning light and the sound of sandals brushing against the dirt path. Slow, steady, soft. Ananda walked through the village as he had entered it, quietly, present, whole, torchal, children were already chasing each other beneath the nime tree. The old farmer was tying bundles of straw. A dog blinked lazily at the breeze. Nothing stopped. No one called out, but eyes lifted, and gazes met his, not in question, but in gratitude. He bowed, not deeply, just enough, and kept walking. At the edge of the village, by the same crooked gate, the young woman stood waiting. She carried no offering, only a smile. A smile with no expectation, a smile of someone who had nothing more to ask, only presence left to share. "You're leaving," she said, not as a question. Ananda nodded. "The river flows," he said simply. She stepped aside to let him pass, but as he moved forward, she reached into her satchel and pulled out a small cloth bundle. "For the road," she offered. He paused, took it, opened it. Inside was the bowl, the same one the child had found, cleaned, still cracked, but held with care. "He said you should take it," she smiled. "But not to keep, just to carry, until it decides again." Ananda bowed, and this time, deeply. "It has already returned once," he said. "Perhaps this time I carry it only until someone else needs it more." The gate creaked behind him as he stepped through. The road curved gently toward the woods. He did not look back. There was no need. What had needed to return had returned. What had remained unsaid had been heard, and what needed no answer had been understood. As he walked, the bowl in his hand felt light, lighter than when he had first released it to the river, because now he no longer needed it to carry anything. The bowl was simply a bowl. The road was simply the road, and the journey was simply living. He passed a shrine made of stone and wildflowers. He stopped for a moment, set the bowl gently on the moss, not to give it away, not to let go, but to leave behind a reminder that emptiness can be sacred, and the things we set down, sometimes, bloom in the hands of others. Then he walked on, and as the path curved out of sight, and the village faded into soundless green, there was no applause, no name spoken, no record kept, only wind, only leaves, only breath. Where the road ended, another path began.